The morning sun peeked through the thick clouds as Sarah adjusted her crisp navy blue uniform. Her reflection in the small mirror of the staff room showed a woman who had spent years perfecting her craft. Polished, composed, and always professional. Today was no different from any other day. She was preparing for yet another international flight from New York to London. It was a route she knew like the back of her hand, one that had become almost second nature after more than a decade working. As a flight attendant, Sarah loved her job. She thrived on the organized chaos of airports, the hum of engines, and the diverse faces she encountered every day. Each passenger brought their own story, their own world, into the cabin, and Sarah prided herself on making them feel comfortable during their journey. Whether it was helping nervous flyers settle into their seats or offering an extra blanket to someone who looked cold, she took pride in her ability to stay calm and collected under pressure. As the boarding process began, Sarah stood near the entrance of the aircraft, greeting passengers with her practiced smile. Families with children, business travelers carrying laptops, couples holding hands all passed by her, each absorbed in their own plans for the trip ahead. Everything seemed ordinary until she noticed him. He stepped onto the plane with an air of quiet confidence, his expensive suit tailored perfectly to his frame. His dark hair was neatly combed, and his piercing blue eyes scanned the cabin briefly before he moved toward the first-class section. For a moment, Sarah froze, her breath catching in her throat. Those eyes. They were unmistakable. They belonged to James, her husband, who had died 5 years ago in a tragic car accident. Her mind raced as she tried to reconcile what she was seeing. Was this some cruel trick of memory, or perhaps exhaustion playing games with her senses? She blinked several times, hoping the image would fade, but it didn't. He was real, sitting there in seat 1A, flipping casually through the in-flight magazine as if nothing unusual was happening. Sarah's heart pounded wildly against her chest. She wanted to run, to scream, to do anything except stand there frozen like a statue. But professionalism kicked in, forcing her feet to move forward. As she approached his seat, her hands trembled slightly while holding the safety instructions. Card. "Welcome aboard," she said softly, her voice barely audible over the low chatter of passengers settling in. The man glanced up at her, his gaze meeting hers for just a fraction of a second. There was no flicker of recognition in his expression, only polite acknowledgement. He nodded curtly and returned his attention to his phone, scrolling absent-mindedly. Sarah felt a wave of confusion wash over her. If this really was James, how could he not remember her? And if it wasn't him, then who was this stranger who bore such an uncanny resemblance? She retreated to the galley, leaning against the counter to steady herself. Her thoughts spiraled out of control. Memories of James flooded her mind, their whirlwind romance, their laughter-filled weekends, the way he used to surprise her with little notes tucked into her suitcase when she went on long flights. All of it came rushing back, sharp and vivid like wounds reopening. Forcing herself to focus, Sarah reminded herself that people could look alike. It wasn't unheard of. Maybe this man simply shared similar features with James. Still, the resemblance was too striking to ignore. Every detail, the curve of his jawline, the way he tilted his head when reading, even the subtle scar above his left eyebrow, it all matched perfectly. Determined to shake off the unsettling feeling, Sarah busied herself with pre-flight preparations. She checked seatbelts, handed out headphones, and ensured everyone was ready for takeoff. Yet no matter how hard she tried, her eyes kept drifting toward seat 1A. Each time they did, her stomach churned with unease. When the captain announced that the plane was about to depart, Sarah took a deep breath and made one final walk down the aisle. As she passed the first-class section, she couldn't help but pause near his seat. This close, the resemblance was even more startling. Her fingers tightened around the edge of the beverage cart, and she willed herself to keep moving. But something inside her refused to let go. Who was this man? Why did he look so much like James? And most importantly, why did seeing him stir emotions she thought she had buried years ago? Questions swirled in her mind, unanswered and relentless. As the plane lifted off the ground, Sarah, found herself staring out the window, watching the city shrink beneath them. Normally, this part of the flight filled her with a sense of peace, a reminder of the vastness of the world. But today, her thoughts were consumed by the figure sitting. Mir rose away. Something about him felt undeniable, as though fate itself had placed him on this flight for a reason. Little did Sarah know, this encounter would change everything she thought she knew about life, love, and loss. For now, however, she could only cling to the fragile hope that maybe, just maybe, the universe still held surprises, even ones she never dared to imagine. As the plane soared higher into the sky, Sarah struggled to focus on her duties. Her mind was a whirlwind of emotions, each memory of James crashing against her like waves in a stormy sea. She moved mechanically through the cabin, handing out drinks and snacks, but her thoughts were far from the task at hand. Every time she passed seat 1A, her eyes darted involuntarily toward the man sitting there. Each glance sent a fresh wave of disbelief coursing through her veins. The first class section felt smaller than usual, as though the walls were closing in around her. How could this stranger look so much like James? It wasn't just his physical appearance, it was his mannerisms, the way he leaned back slightly in his seat, the confident yet relaxed posture that reminded her so vividly of her late husband. Even the way he tapped his fingers lightly against the armrest mirrored a habit James used to have when deep in thought. The similarities were overwhelming, almost suffocating. Sarah's hands trembled as she poured coffee for another passenger. She forced herself to smile, masking her inner turmoil behind a practiced expression of calm professionalism. But inside, her heart was racing, pounding so loudly she feared someone might hear it. She couldn't shake the feeling that this man, this stranger, was somehow connected to her past. Was it possible that fate had brought him here for a reason? Or was her grief making her see things that weren't real? Her thoughts drifted back to happier times, memories she had tried so hard to lock away after James's death. They had met during one of her earlier flights nearly 10 years ago. He had been seated in economy class, dressed casually but with an undeniable charm that caught her attention immediately. Their eyes met briefly as she served him a drink, and he flashed her a warm smile that made her stomach flutter. "You're very good at your job," he had said teasingly, his voice smooth and inviting. From that moment on, their connection grew quickly. They exchanged numbers before the flight ended, and within weeks they were inseparable. James had been everything she ever wanted: kind, funny, ambitious, and endlessly supportive. He understood the demands of her career and never complained about her long hours or frequent travels. Instead, he surprised her with little gestures of love, like leaving handwritten notes tucked into her suitcase or sending her flowers at work. Their wedding had been simple yet beautiful, held in a small chapel surrounded by close friends and family. Sarah remembered how handsome James looked in his suit, how his eyes sparkled as he promised to love her forever. Those promises had felt unbreakable at the time, but life had other plans. 5 years ago, a devastating car accident robbed her of the man she loved. James had been driving home from a business trip when his car skidded off the road during a rainstorm. By the time emergency services arrived, it was too late. Losing James shattered Sarah in ways she still hadn't fully recovered from. The early days after his death were a blur of tears, sleepless nights, and endless questions. Why him? Why then? Over time, the sharp edges of her grief softened, replaced by a dull ache that lingered in the background of her life. She threw herself into her work, using the routine of flying to keep her mind occupied. It helped, but nothing could truly fill the void James left behind. Now, staring at this man who looked exactly like her late husband, all those buried feelings resurfaced with a vengeance. Sarah found herself questioning everything she thought she knew about loss and closure. Could it really be James? Was it possible that he hadn't died that night? Or was this some cruel twist of fate, a doppelganger sent to torment her? Determined to regain control of her emotions, Sarah retreated to the galley for a moment of solitude. She leaned against the counter, closing her eyes and taking slow, deliberate breaths. In her mind, Fragments of memories played like scenes from an old movie. James laughing at her terrible jokes. James holding her hand during turbulent flights. James whispering, "I love you," before falling asleep beside her. These moments were supposed to belong to the past, yet here they were, rushing back with startling clarity. When she finally opened her eyes, she noticed her reflection in the polished metal surface of the beverage cart. Her face was pale, her lips pressed tightly together in an effort to hold back tears. She had always prided herself on being strong, on handling difficult situations with grace. But this was something entirely different. This wasn't just a challenging passenger or a stressful flight. This was personal, raw, and deeply unsettling. Pushing aside her doubts, Sarah decided to test the waters. If this man truly was James, or even if he wasn't, she needed answers. Gathering her courage, she approached seat 1A once more. This time, she stopped directly beside him, clutching the beverage tray tightly to steady her shaking hands. "Can I get you anything else?" she asked, her voice soft but steady. The man glanced up at her, his piercing blue eyes locking onto hers. For a brief second, Sarah thought she saw a flicker of recognition in his gaze, but it vanished almost instantly. "No, thank you," he replied politely, his tone measured and calm. There was something about his voice that sent shivers down her spine. It was deeper now, more refined, but undeniably familiar. Unable to resist, Sarah added, "You remind me of someone I used to know." Her words hung in the air between them, heavy with unspoken meaning. The man raised an eyebrow, studying her face intently. "Is that so?" he said slowly, his curiosity evident. "Who?" Sarah hesitated, unsure how to proceed. Should she tell him the truth? Would he think she was crazy? Before she could respond, the intercom crackled to life, announcing that the plane would soon begin its descent. The interruption gave her an excuse to retreat, but it also left her feeling frustrated and unsatisfied. She needed more time, more information, more proof. Returning to the galley, Sarah replayed their conversation in her mind. His reaction, or lack thereof, only deepened the mystery. If this man was indeed James, why didn't he remember her? And if he wasn't, why did he look so much like him? The question swirled endlessly, refusing to let her rest. As the plane began its descent toward London, Sarah stared out the window, watching the clouds part to reveal the sprawling city below. Normally, this view filled her with excitement, a reminder of the adventures waiting beyond the horizon. But today her mind was consumed by uncertainty. Who was the man in seat 1A? What secrets did he hold? And most importantly, what would happen when they landed? For now, Sarah could only wait, clinging to the fragile hope that answers would come soon. Little did she know, the journey ahead would unravel truths far greater and more astonishing than she ever imagined. The plane touched down at Heathrow Airport with a gentle thud, jolting Sarah out of her restless thoughts. Passengers began unbuckling their seatbelts and gathering their belongings, eager to disembark after the long flight. Sarah, however, felt paralyzed, unable to move from her spot near the galley. Her mind was still spinning with questions about the man in seat 1A. She couldn't let him walk away without finding out more. This wasn't just curiosity. It was an urgent need for clarity, as though her entire world hinged on uncovering the truth. Summoning every ounce of courage she possessed, Sarah approached him again as passengers filed past him toward the exit. He was adjusting his tie, seemingly unfazed by the chaos around him. "Sir," she said softly, her voice trembling slightly despite her best efforts to sound calm. "Could I speak with you for a moment?" He looked up, surprised by her request, but not unkind. His piercing blue eyes studied her face intently, searching for something. Perhaps a clue to why she seemed so familiar to him. After a pause, he nodded. "Of course," he replied, his tone polite yet tinged with curiosity. Sarah gestured toward the empty row of seats nearby, where they could talk without being overheard. As they sat down, she took a deep breath, trying to organize her jumbled thoughts into coherent words. I don't know how to say this," she began hesitantly, her fingers fidgeting nervously in her lap. "But you look exactly like someone I used to know. Someone very important to me." The man tilted his head slightly, his expression softening. "Oh?" he said, clearly intrigued. "Who is it you think I resemble?" Sarah swallowed hard, her heart pounding wildly in her chest. "My husband," she admitted finally, the words spilling out before she could stop them. "His name was James. We were married for 3 years until—" Her voice trailed off, choked with emotion. She glanced away, blinking back tears. For a moment, silence hung between them, heavy and charged with unspoken tension. Then, to Sarah's astonishment, the man leaned forward, his brow furrowing in thought. "James," he repeated slowly, testing the name on his tongue. "That does sound familiar, but I'm not sure why." Sarah's pulse quickened. Could it be possible that this stranger had some connection to James? Or was he simply humoring her, caught off guard by her emotional confession? Desperate for answers, she pressed further. "Do you have any memories of your childhood? Of people or places you might have known before?" He hesitated, his gaze drifting downward as though searching for fragments of his past buried deep within his mind. "To be honest," he said quietly, "my memory has always been patchy. I remember bits and pieces, flashes of faces and voices, but nothing concrete. It's like trying to piece together a puzzle with half the pieces missing." Sarah listened intently, her heart racing. What he described sounded eerily similar to what she'd read about amnesia, a condition where victims lose chunks of their memories due to trauma or injury. Could it be that this man sitting before her wasn't a stranger at all? Could he somehow be James, reborn under a different identity? Before she could ask more, he continued, his tone growing firmer. "Look, I appreciate your honesty, but I'm not sure how much help I can be. My name is Alexander Hartwell. I've built my life around that identity. If you're saying I remind you of someone else, I suppose it's possible. People do look alike sometimes." Sarah flinched at the name, Alexander Hartwell. It didn't belong to James. It belonged to a billionaire entrepreneur whose face occasionally appeared in magazines and business journals. She had seen those articles before, always dismissing them because the resemblance to James had never registered in her mind. Now, staring at him directly, it was impossible to deny. "I've heard of you," she murmured, her voice barely above, a whisper. "You're wealthy, successful. You run charities and companies." She paused, struggling to reconcile the image of the man she once loved with this polished, powerful figure before her. "But none of that explains why you look exactly like my husband." Alexander, or whoever he truly was, looked uncomfortable, shifting slightly in his seat. "I don't know what to tell you," he admitted. "Maybe it's coincidence. Maybe there's something deeper going on here. All I can say is that I feel drawn to you too, like we've met before. But beyond that—" He shrugged helplessly. Sarah nodded, understanding that pushing him further wouldn't yield immediate answers. Instead, she decided to take a different approach. "Would you mind if I looked into this?" she asked cautiously. "If there's even a chance that you're connected to James, I owe it to myself, and to him, to find out." To her relief, Alexander agreed. "I understand," he said gently. "And honestly, I'd like to know the truth too. There are gaps in my life that I've never been able to fill. Perhaps you can help me make sense of them." With that, they exchanged contact information, promising to meet again once Sarah had gathered more details. As passengers continued streaming off the plane, Sarah watched Alexander disappear into the crowd, his tall figure blending seamlessly with the bustling terminal. For the first time since spotting him, she felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe, just maybe, fate hadn't taken James away permanently. Maybe it had simply hidden him behind a new name and a new life. Back home later that evening, Sarah poured herself a cup of tea and settled in front of her laptop. Her hands trembled as she typed Alexander Hartwell into the search bar. Dozens of articles popped up, detailing his rise from obscurity to becoming one of the wealthiest men in the world. Photos accompanied each story, showing him shaking, hands with dignitaries, cutting ribbons at charity events and posing confidently in tailored suits. Yet, amidst the glamour and success, there were hints of mystery. Many profiles noted that little was known about his early life. Some speculated that he came from humble beginnings, while others claimed he inherited his fortune. One article mentioned that he had been involved in a serious accident years ago, a car crash that left him hospitalized for months. The timeline matched perfectly with James's supposed death. Sarah's heart skipped a beat. Was it possible that James hadn't died after all? That instead, he had survived the crash only to lose his memory and start anew as Alexander Hartwell? The idea felt both thrilling and terrifying. If true, it meant that James had been alive all along, living a completely separate existence without any recollection of their shared past. Determined to dig deeper, Sarah scoured social media platforms and public records for additional clues. She discovered that Alexander rarely spoke about his personal life, preferring to keep his focus on his work and philanthropy. Friends and colleagues described him as private but kind-hearted, traits that aligned perfectly with the James she remembered. By midnight, Sarah's head was spinning with possibilities. Everything pointed to the startling conclusion that Alexander Hartwell and James were one and the same person. Yet, proving it would require confronting him directly and risking the possibility that she might be wrong. Still, she knew she couldn't ignore the evidence. Tomorrow, she vowed, she would arrange another meeting with him. Whatever the outcome, she needed closure, not just for herself but for the man who might still carry pieces of her husband's soul buried beneath layers of a new identity. As she turned off the light and climbed into bed, Sarah stared at the ceiling, her mind buzzing with unanswered questions. Who was Alexander Hartwell really? And if he was indeed James, what did that mean for their future, or the remnants of their past? For now, all she could do was wait and prepare for the next chapter of this extraordinary journey. The next morning, Sarah woke up with a sense of purpose she hadn't felt in years. Her mind was still heavy with unanswered questions, but there was also a spark of determination burning inside her. She couldn't let this mystery slip away. Whether Alexander Hartwell was truly James or not, she owed it to herself and to the memory of the man she loved to uncover the truth. After a quick breakfast, Sarah grabbed her laptop and began digging even deeper into Alexander's life. She pored over news articles, interviews, and social media posts, searching for anything that might connect him to James. The more she read, the more convinced she became that the two men were one and the same. Yet something nagged at her, a feeling that she needed concrete proof before confronting him again. She decided to visit the hospital where James had been pronounced dead 5 years ago. It was a long shot, but perhaps there were records or clues hidden in the archives that could shed light on what really happened that night. Armed with nothing but hope and a few documents from her past, Sarah drove to the medical center located on the outskirts of the city. When she arrived, the receptionist greeted her with a polite smile. "How can I assist you?" the woman asked, her voice warm and welcoming. Sarah hesitated for a moment, unsure how to explain her unusual request. Finally, she said, "I'm trying to find information about an accident that occurred here about 5 years ago. My husband, his name was James, was involved. He was declared deceased, but now I have reason to believe he might still be alive." The receptionist frowned, clearly taken aback by Sarah's words. "That sounds very complicated," she admitted. "Patient records are confidential, so we can't share them without proper authorization. But if you'd like, I can check if any staff members who worked here back then are available to speak with you." Sarah nodded gratefully. "Thank you. That would mean a lot." While waiting, she paced nervously around the lobby, her thoughts racing. What if no one remembered James? Or worse, what if they confirmed his death, leaving her hopes shattered? Once again, after what felt like hours, a middle-aged nurse approached her. "You're looking for information about James?" the woman asked gently. Sarah's heart leapt at the recognition in her voice. "Yes," she exclaimed. "Do you remember him?" The nurse nodded slowly, her expression thoughtful. "He was brought in after a car crash," she recalled. It was bad. Very bad. We didn't think he'd survive. But somehow, against all odds, he pulled through. By the time he regained consciousness, though, he was different, confused. He didn't recognize anyone, not even himself. We assumed he'd lost his memory due to the trauma. Sarah listened intently, her pulse quickening. This was exactly what she had hoped to hear. "What happened after that?" she asked eagerly. "Did he stay here?" "No," the nurse replied. "He disappeared shortly after waking up. His family, they never came forward, and neither did he. We reported him as unidentified and moved on. At the time, we thought he must have passed away elsewhere because his condition was so critical. Now, hearing your story," she trailed off, shaking her head in disbelief. "It's remarkable." Tears welled up in Sarah's eyes as the pieces began falling into place. James hadn't died. He had simply vanished, leaving behind a void she had spent years mourning. And somewhere along the way, he had reinvented himself as Alexander Hartwell, a successful billionaire with no memory of his former life. Determined to confront Alexander with this newfound knowledge, Sarah called him later that afternoon. "When?" he answered. His tone was cautious but curious. "Sarah," he said, sounding surprised. "Is everything okay?" "I need to see you," she replied firmly. "There's something important I have to tell you. Something that might change everything." They agreed to meet at a quiet cafe near Alexander's penthouse apartment. As Sarah waited for him to arrive, her nerves were stretched taut. Would he believe her? Would he want to know the truth about his past? Or would he reject it entirely? When Alexander walked in, his presence commanded attention. Dressed in a sleek gray suit, he exuded confidence and authority. But beneath his polished exterior, Sarah saw glimpses of the man she used to know, the man who had made her laugh, held her hand during turbulent flights, and promised to love her forever. "Sarah," he said, sliding into the seat across from her. "You sounded serious on the phone. What's going on?" Taking a deep breath, Sarah launched into her explanation. She told him about visiting the hospital, speaking with the nurse, and learning that James had survived the crash only to vanish without a trace. She described the timeline, the injuries, and the amnesia, all details that matched perfectly with his own fragmented memories. For a long while, Alexander sat silently, absorbing her words. His face was unreadable, a mix of shock, confusion, and something else Sarah couldn't quite identify. Finally, he spoke. "If what you're saying is true," he said slowly, "then my entire life has been built on a lie. Everything I thought I knew about myself, it's not real." Sarah reached out instinctively, placing her hand over his. "Maybe not," she admitted softly. "But that doesn't mean you aren't real. You've become someone incredible. A man who helps others, who builds businesses, who makes a difference in the world. None of that changes no matter what name you go by." Alexander stared at her, his blue eyes filled with emotion. "And you?" he asked quietly. "Do you still love me? Even though I don't remember being James?" Tears streamed down Sarah's face as she nodded. "I never stopped loving you," she whispered. "No matter what happened, no matter how much time passed, a part of me always believed you were out there somewhere. I just didn't know where or who you were." Her honesty seemed to break through whatever walls Alexander had built around himself. For the first time since their encounter on the plane, he allowed himself to feel vulnerable. "I don't remember our life together," he admitted, his voice thick with emotion. "But when I look at you, I feel something, a connection. Like, maybe deep down I've been waiting for this moment too." Sarah smiled through her tears, overwhelmed by the weight of his words. They weren't answers, not yet, but they were a start. Together, they vowed to piece together the fragments of his past, to rebuild the bridge between the man he used to be and the man he had become. As they left the cafe, walking side by side, under the soft glow of streetlights, Sarah felt a glimmer of hope she hadn't dared to imagine. The road ahead wouldn't be easy. There were still countless questions to answer, wounds to heal, and memories to reclaim. But for the first time in years, she felt certain of one thing. Fate had brought James back to her, even if it was in a form she never expected, and maybe, just maybe, that was enough. The days that followed their meeting at the cafe were a whirlwind of emotions for both Sarah and Alexander, or James, as she couldn't help but think of him. They spent hours together, piecing together fragments of his past and trying to bridge the gap between who he was now and who he had once been. It wasn't easy. Memories didn't return all at once. They came in flashes like shards of glass reflecting light from different angles. Each memory brought both clarity and confusion, joy and pain. One evening, as they sat in Alexander's luxurious penthouse overlooking the city skyline, Sarah pulled out an old photo album. She had carried it with her for years, unwilling to part with the memories it held. "I thought these might help," she said softly, placing the worn book on the coffee table between them. "Seeing pictures of maybe it'll trigger something." Alexander hesitated before opening the album. His fingers hovered above the cover, trembling slightly. For someone who had spent years believing he was one person, confronting evidence of another life felt daunting. But he nodded, steeling himself. "Okay," he murmured. "Let's try." The first picture showed James, his younger self, standing beside Sarah outside a small chapel. They were dressed in wedding attire, smiling radiantly despite the simplicity of their surroundings. Alexander stared at the image, his brow furrowing as though trying to place it. "That's us?" he asked, his voice tinged with disbelief. "Yes," Sarah replied, her eyes glistening with tears. "Our wedding day. You looked so happy." She pointed to the scar above his eyebrow in the photo. "See? That's from when you fell off your bike as a kid. You always joked about how it made you look tough." Alexander traced the scar on his face absent-mindedly, his expression softening. "I don't remember falling off a bike," he admitted. "But I do feel something. Like a faint echo of familiarity." Encouraged by his response, Sarah flipped to the next page. This time, the photo showed them lounging on a beach during their honeymoon. James wore sunglasses perched atop his head, while Sarah leaned against him, laughing at some private joke. "We stayed up all night talking about our dreams," Sarah recalled fondly. "You said you wanted to travel the world with me, see every corner of it." A flicker of recognition crossed Alexander's face. "Travel," he repeated slowly. "That's why I started my company, to fund expeditions, charities. I wanted to explore the world, even if I didn't know why." Sarah's heart skipped a beat. Could it be that James's subconscious desires had influenced Alexander's decisions, shaping his new identity without him realizing it? The idea filled her with hope. Maybe the man she loved hadn't disappeared entirely. Maybe parts of him had lingered, guiding him even in his amnesiac state. As they continued flipping through the album, more memories surfaced. A family Christmas gathering where James played charades hilariously badly. A quiet afternoon at home, curled up on the couch watching old movies. Each image sparked a reaction in Alexander, a fleeting smile, a furrowed brow, or a distant gaze as though he were reaching for something just out of reach. But not all memories were joyful. When they reached a photo taken shortly before the accident, Sarah noticed Alexander stiffen. The picture showed James boarding a plane, waving goodbye. It was the last time she had seen him alive, or so she had thought. "That flight," she whispered, her voice breaking. "It was supposed to be routine. You were coming back from a business trip. Then, the crash." Alexander closed his eyes, pressing his fingers to his temples. "I remember rain," he said suddenly, "and headlights, bright lights everywhere, then nothing." He opened his eyes, looking at Sarah with a mixture of fear and determination. "What happened after that?" Sarah hesitated, unsure how much to reveal. The truth was painful, not just for her but for anyone who heard it. "They found you unconscious near the wreckage," she explained gently. "Doctors said you were barely alive. When you woke up, you didn't recognize anyone." Eventually, you vanished. Everyone assumed you had died somewhere else because your injuries were so severe. For a long moment, silence settled between them, heavy with unspoken grief. Then Alexander spoke, his voice steady despite the storm raging inside him. So I became Alexander Hartwell, adopted by a wealthy family, given a new name, a new life. All this time I've been living as someone else, thinking I was whole, but I wasn't. Part of me was missing, the part tied to you. Tears streamed down Sarah's face as she reached for his hand. You're here now, she said firmly. That's what matters. We can rebuild, piece by piece, together. Over the next few weeks, they worked tirelessly to fill in the gaps. Sarah took Alexander to places they had visited as a couple, parks, restaurants, museums, hoping to jog his memory. Sometimes it worked. Other times, frustration bubbled to the surface, leaving both of them exhausted. Yet through it all, their bond grew stronger. Alexander began to see glimpses of the man he used to be, and Sarah rediscovered the qualities she had fallen in love with: his kindness, his humor, his unwavering support. One day, while exploring an art gallery, Alexander stopped abruptly in front of a painting. It depicted a serene countryside scene, bathed in golden sunlight. This reminds me of somewhere, he said, frowning. Somewhere important. Sarah tilted her head, studying the painting. Then realization dawned. Our anniversary trip, she breathed. We rented a cottage in the countryside. You painted sunsets every evening, saying you wanted to capture the colors before they faded. Alexander's eyes widened. I painted? He asked incredulously. I don't even know how to hold a brush anymore. You will again, Sarah assured him. If you want to. Her words seemed to ignite something within him. For the first time since learning the truth, Alexander smiled. Not the polished professional smile he used in boardrooms, but a genuine, heartfelt grin that lit up his entire face. Maybe I do, he said softly. Maybe there's still more of James left than I thought. Their journey wasn't without challenges. There were moments when Alexander struggled to reconcile his two identities, torn between the billionaire, entrepreneur he had become and the loving husband he had forgotten. Doubts crept in, threatening to undo the progress they had made. But Sarah remained steadfast, reminding him that love wasn't about perfection. It was about embracing imperfections and finding strength in vulnerability. Late one night, as they stood on the balcony of Alexander's penthouse, Sarah turned to him. The city lights twinkled below, a stark contrast to the quiet intimacy between them. Do you believe in miracles? She asked, her voice trembling with emotion. Alexander smiled, pulling her close. I do now, he replied, because finding you again feels like one. In that moment, surrounded by the vastness of the world yet grounded in each other's presence, they knew they had been given a second chance, a rare gift that neither of them would take for granted. Whatever lay ahead, they would face it together, rebuilding their story one memory at a time. The weeks turned into months, and slowly but surely Alexander, or James, began to reclaim pieces of his past. With Sarah's unwavering support, he started to see himself not as two separate people, but as one whole individual shaped by both lives. It wasn't easy. There were days when the weight of his dual identity felt overwhelming. Yet, with every memory that resurfaced, every shared laugh or tear, they grew closer than ever before. One crisp autumn morning, Alexander woke up earlier than usual. The sun had just begun to rise, casting a soft golden glow over the city outside, his penthouse windows. He stood on the balcony sipping coffee and watching the world come alive below. For years, this view had symbolized his success, the empire he had built, the life he had created after losing himself. But now, it meant something different. It represented hope, redemption, and the promise of a future he never thought possible. Sarah joined him moments later, wrapping her arms around his waist from behind. Good morning, she murmured, resting her head against his shoulder. You're up early. I couldn't sleep, Alexander admitted, turning to face her. His blue eyes sparkled with a mix of nostalgia and excitement. I kept thinking about everything we've been through, the crash, the years apart, finding each other again. It feels surreal, doesn't it? Sarah nodded, smiling softly. It does. But I think that's what makes it so special. We didn't just stumble upon each other by chance. This is fate giving us another shot. Alexander reached out, brushing a stray strand of hair from her face. And I don't plan on wasting it, he said firmly. Not this time. Their conversation shifted to lighter topics as they prepared for the day ahead. Over breakfast, Sarah mentioned an upcoming charity gala Alexander was scheduled to attend. Normally, such events were routine for him, a chance to network and showcase his philanthropic efforts. But today he hesitated, glancing at Sarah thoughtfully. What if you came with me? He suggested suddenly. As my date. Sarah raised an eyebrow, amused. Don't you always go alone to these things? Yes, Alexander replied. But tonight feels different. I want everyone to know that I'm not just Alexander Hartwell anymore. I'm James too, and I have you back in my life. That's worth celebrating. Touched by his words, Sarah agreed. Together they spent the afternoon getting ready, sharing laughter and playful banter like they used to in their younger days. When they finally stepped out onto the red carpet that evening, cameras flashing all around them, Sarah felt a surge of pride. This wasn't just a billionaire making headlines, it was the man she loved, standing tall and unafraid to embrace his true self. At the gala, Alexander gave a speech that left the audience spellbound. He spoke candidly about his journey, from surviving the car accident to losing his memory, from building a new life as Alexander Hartwell to rediscovering his past with Sarah. Life has a way of testing us, he concluded, his gaze locking with Sarah's across the room. But it also gives us second chances if we're brave enough to take them. Tonight I celebrate not only my successes, but the love that brought me home. The crowd erupted into applause, but Sarah barely noticed. Her heart swelled with emotion as tears streamed down her face. In that moment she realized how far they had come, not just individually but together. They weren't the same people they had been 5 years ago, and that was okay. Their experiences had changed them, strengthened them, and made their bond even deeper. After the event, they returned to the penthouse, where Alexander led Sarah onto the balcony once more. The city lights twinkled below, mirroring the stars above. He pulled a small velvet box from his pocket and knelt down on one knee, taking her hand in his. Sarah, he began, his voice steady yet filled with emotion. You've been my anchor through everything, my past, my present, and now my future. Will you marry me? Again? Sarah gasped, covering her mouth with her free hand as tears spilled down her cheeks. Yes, she whispered, nodding fervently. Of course, yes. Slipping the ring onto her finger, Alexander stood and pulled her into a tight embrace. They kissed under the starlit sky, sealing their commitment to start anew. This time there would be no secrets, no misunderstandings, just two souls bound by love, ready to face whatever lay ahead. In the weeks that followed, they planned a quiet wedding ceremony, reminiscent of their first. Friends and family gathered to witness their union, marveling at the strength of their relationship. As they exchanged vows, Sarah couldn't help but reflect on how far they had come. From tragedy to triumph, from loss to rediscovery, their story was a testament to the resilience of the human spirit. Life wasn't perfect. They still faced challenges, still grappled with the complexities of blending two lives into one. But they faced them together, leaning on each other for strength and guidance. Alexander continued his work as a philanthropist, using his wealth to make a difference in the world. Sarah resumed her career as a flight attendant, cherishing the freedom and adventure it brought. And in between their busy schedules, they carved out moments to simply be, to hold hands, share stories, and dream of the future. One evening, as they sat side by side on the couch, flipping through the old photo album once more, Alexander paused at a picture of them dancing at their first wedding. Do you remember this? He asked, pointing to the image. Sarah smiled, nodding. How could I forget? You stepped on my toes so many times I thought my feet would bruise. Alexander chuckled, pulling her to her feet. Well, let's see if I've improved since then. He wrapped his arms around her waist, swaying gently to the music playing softly in the background. As they danced, Sarah rested her head against his chest, listening to the steady rhythm of his heartbeat. It was a sound she had feared she would never hear again, a reminder that miracles do exist even in the most unexpected forms. Their journey hadn't been easy, nor was it without scars. But those scars told a story of love, perseverance, and the incredible power of second chances. As they gazed into each other's eyes, they knew one thing for certain. No matter what the future held, they would face it together, hand in hand, heart to heart. And that, they decided, was enough.